The year is 1593. You are a Japanese samurai marching through the Korean countryside. Your armor gleams under the morning sun. Your sword is the sharpest that has ever existed. And your army of 30,000 warriors has just absolutely crushed everything in its path over the last few months. Entire cities have fallen. Korean generals have fled. The road to Seoul seems open and unobstructed. Nothing in the world seems capable of stopping you. Then, at the top of a hill, you spot something strange. A wooden cart with dozens of bamboo tubes pointed in your direction. In an instant, the sky catches fire. In less than 60 seconds, 200 flaming arrows rip through the air at the same time, with a roar you have never heard before and will never forget. Welcome, explorer! Today, we're going to uncover the secrets of the most impressive and disturbing weapons humanity has ever created. 6 ancient weapons that terrified the world. We're talking about technologies that shouldn't have existed at the time they were created. Knowledge that pushed the limits of what was possible, conquered continents, and then mysteriously disappeared from history. Get ready, because I am Curious Chris, and I'll guide you on this journey. First weapon, Hwacha. The sound is deafening, as if the sky itself were shattering. The entire horizon disappears behind a dense curtain of black smoke and orange flames. There is no way to run because the projectiles come from every angle at once. There is no way to defend yourself because no armor was ever made for this. The arrows fall like a storm that burns, that pierces, that shows no mercy. Warriors who were trained since childhood for hand-to-hand combat fall into complete panic. The formation collapses in seconds. The army of 30,000 men, undefeated until that moment, is defeated by 3,400 defenders, and a machine no one on that battlefield had ever seen before. That machine was the Hwacha, and it changed warfare forever. The Hwacha was invented in 1409 during the Joseon dynasty by Korean military engineers who decided to do something seemingly simple. Take the rocket arrows that China was already using and multiply everything on a scale no one had tried before. The result was a sturdy wooden cart with up to 200 launch tubes arranged in precise rows, each one loaded with a gunpowder-propelled arrow. With a single ignition, all 200 projectiles were fired simultaneously, reaching targets more than 450 meters away with devastating accuracy. Reload time was less than a minute with a well-trained crew. For its time, it was the functional equivalent of a modern machine gun, except it was invented 500 years before any machine gun existed. Now stop and think about the real engineering challenge behind this. Launching 200 rockets at the same time without the cart catching fire, exploding, or simply tipping over required extremely precise calculations of launch angle, materials highly resistant to heat, and perfectly identical gunpowder charges in each of the 200 tubes. If a single rocket tube failed in the wrong direction, it could wipe out its own crew in a fraction of a second. And all of this was solved in 1409, without computers, without modern engineering, without laboratory testing. The Korean engineers of the Joseon dynasty solved a physics and ballistics problem that the Soviets would only face again in 1941 with the legendary Katyusha, the multiple rocket launcher that German soldiers called Stalin's organ, and feared more than any other weapon. The Hwacha arrived 532 years earlier, and it worked just as well. What makes the Hwacha truly impossible to ignore is that it wasn't just a weapon of destruction. It was a carefully calculated psychological weapon. Imagine being a warrior conditioned by years of intense training to face the enemy eye to eye, to feel the weight of the sword in your hands. to hear the clash of metal against metal and stand firm. And suddenly the entire sky collapses on you in flames, coming from a direction you can barely see, without warning, without reaction time, without anything your courage or skill can do. No training in the world prepares anyone for that. And that is exactly why it worked so well in 1593, and exactly why the same principle is still used today in multiple rocket artillery systems around the world. The Hwacha did not win battles with fire and iron alone. It won with something far more powerful, the fear of what cannot be fought. And if a wooden cart built in 1409 was capable of all that, imagine what else history has decided not to tell us. The answer may be buried in the frozen fields of northern Europe, etched into metal blades that simply should not exist in the time in which they were forged. Ulfberht Sword. The year is 900 AD. You are a Norse warrior crossing the Baltic Sea in a drakkar. The wind cuts across your face, salt clings to your beard, and at your waist rests the most valuable weapon you have ever held in your life. It's not gold. It's not silver. It's a sword. But not just any sword. Etched into the blade, in letters that few can read, is a name. Ulfberht. Other warriors look at you differently when they see this sword, because they know what it means. It doesn't break, it doesn't bend, it slices through other swords as if they were dry branches. And the impossible thing is that, according to modern science, this metal simply could not exist in the 9th century. But it does, and it is in museums around the world to this day. Since the 19th century, archaeologists have found more than 170 Ulfberht swords scattered across Scandinavia, Russia, and Ukraine. For decades, no one understood what was special about them beyond the name engraved on the blade. Then, in the 1960s, the first metallurgical tests were carried out, and the results left scientists in silence. The swords contained steel with a carbon content between 1 and 1.2%, 3 times higher than any other blade from the same period. This level of purity and carbon concentration required furnaces capable of reaching temperatures above 1,800 degrees Fahrenheit, large-scale industrial facilities, and technical expertise that, according to every historical record we have, simply did not exist in Europe until the Industrial Revolution, 800 years later. In 2012, Dr. Alan Williams confirmed all of this with even more precise analyses. The swords were real, the metal was real, and no one had an explanation. The most widely accepted theory among historians is that the Vikings did not produce this steel. They imported it. Viking trade routes, especially the famous Varangian Way, connected Scandinavia directly to the Islamic metallurgical centers of Persia and India, where crucible steel, known as wootz, was already being produced with mastery. Viking smiths would simply have reforged these imported ingots into swords, engraving the name Ulfberht as a mark of quality, almost like a medieval guarantee seal. Some historians believe that Ulfberht himself was a specific blacksmith, or perhaps a small secret workshop, that had mastered this reforging technique and guarded this knowledge with their lives. After all, fake Ulfberht replicas have been found, made with lower quality iron, which proves that the brand was valuable enough to be counterfeited. But the more you analyze, the more questions appear. If the Vikings simply bought this steel from the Middle East, why did no other European culture, with access to the same trade routes, produce swords with the same characteristics? The Venetians stole practically every Byzantine technology they could find. The Franks dominated Mediterranean trade. The Saxons had contact with the Vikings. No one else came close to Ulfberht quality. And there's another detail that bothers researchers even more. There is no intermediate example, no sword of halfway quality, no failed attempt, no learning curve in the archaeological record. The Ulfberht swords appear in the 9th century already perfect, already finished, as if the knowledge had appeared out of nowhere, fully formed, without mistakes, without visible evolution. Think about what this means in practice. A medieval blacksmith, with no thermometers, no measuring equipment, no modern scientific instruments of any kind, maintained a specific carbon content of 1 to 1.2%, with enough consistency to produce hundreds of swords over decades. How? By the color of the glowing metal? By the sound of the hammer? By the smell of the forge? Whatever the answer, that blacksmith knew something that all of Europe would take 800 years to rediscover. And when the Ulfberht period ended, around the year 1000 AD, that knowledge disappeared just as completely as it had arrived. No records, no heirs, no continuity. As if someone had deliberately erased every trace of that knowledge from the world. If a Viking sword holds secrets that modern science is still trying to decipher, imagine what is hidden inside an Egyptian tomb, wrapped in gold and linen, waiting to be found for more than 3,000 years. Tutankhamun's dagger. The year is 1925. Howard Carter kneels on the dusty floor of an Egyptian tomb that has remained sealed for more than 3,000 years. He has already found golden masks, thrones encrusted with precious stones, gilded statues, and treasures no human being had seen since the death of a teenage pharaoh. But then, wrapped inside the linen bandages covering Tutankhamun's mummy, between the king's ribs and right thigh, he finds something different. A dagger, with a gold handle, a crystal pommel, and a dark, strange blade that looks like nothing he has ever seen before. For 90 years, this dagger remained in museums, studied and admired. Everyone assumed it was ordinary iron, rare for the time, but nothing beyond that. Then, in 2016, scientists pointed an X-ray device at the blade, and what they found changed everything. The portable X-ray fluorescence analysis, conducted by the team of researcher Daniela Comelli, revealed a chemical composition that does not exist in any known terrestrial ore. The blade contained 10.8% nickel, 0.58% cobalt, and 0.2% phosphorus. These numbers may sound cold and technical, but for a geochemist they have a very precise meaning. This is the chemical signature of an octahedrite meteorite, one of the rarest types of space rock that can fall to Earth. The team went even further and compared the blade's composition with known meteorites in the region. The match was almost perfect with the Karga meteorite, found 150 kilometers west of Alexandria. The dagger buried with Tutankhamun was not forged from Earth. It came from space. Now put this into real historical context. Tutankhamun died in 1324 BC, at the height of the Bronze Age. At that time, iron was so rare in Egypt that it was worth more than gold. Iron metallurgy was still taking its first steps in other parts of the world, and the Egyptians barely knew how to work it. Of all the iron artifacts found in Egypt from that period, only 19 exist, and 9 of them are of confirmed meteoritic origin. In other words, the main source of iron for the ancient Egyptians was not mines. It was the sky, and they knew it. Egyptian hieroglyphs have a specific term for iron that translates literally as metal of the sky or iron that fell from the stars. They not only used meteorites, they somehow understood that this material came from somewhere else. What impresses modern metallurgists is not just the origin of the material, but what was done with it. Working with meteoritic iron is extraordinarily difficult. The irregular distribution of nickel in the metal creates stress zones that make the blade crack or break if heated the wrong way. Modern blacksmiths who have tried to replicate the process report that it requires extreme sensitivity to the behavior of the metal, working with minimal heat, hammering with surgical precision, feeling the material respond to every strike. Tutankhamun's blade has no cracks, no structural imperfections. The integrity of the metal is perfect after more than 3,000 years. The Egyptians mastered an extremely specific forging technique for a material they technically shouldn't even have known existed, at a time when iron metallurgy had barely begun anywhere in the world. Here is the question archaeologists still cannot answer with certainty. How did they develop this knowledge? Some researchers believe the blade may have been a diplomatic gift from the Hittites, who were the masters of iron in antiquity and maintained relations with Egypt. Others suggest that Egyptian royal workshops processed enough meteorites to empirically develop the correct technique, trial and error, generation after generation, until they reached perfection. But none of these explanations fully accounts for why such specific, advanced, and precious knowledge simply disappeared without leaving a trace, without being passed on, without evolving into a broader metallurgical tradition. Tutankhamun's dagger exists. It is real. It is in the Egyptian Museum in Cairo. But the knowledge that created it evaporated along with the civilization that forged it. And if the Egyptians found power in the stars, imagine what the Aztecs found right here on Earth, in the volcanic depths of their own territory, in a material so sharp that nature took millions of years to create it. Macuahuitl. The year is 1519. You are a Spanish soldier landing on the coast of Mexico with Hernán Cortés. Your steel armor is the best Europe can produce. Your Toledo sword was forged by master smiths with centuries of tradition. You have already fought in European wars, faced knights, pikemen, and arquebusiers. You rightly believe you are among the best-equipped warriors in the known world. Then you see an Aztec warrior advancing toward you for the first time. He is not carrying a sword. He is not carrying a spear. He carries something that looks like a wooden paddle with pieces of black stone fitted into its edges. You almost feel sorry for him. Then he swings that weapon once, and the horse of the soldier beside you falls dead to the ground, its head severed with a single blow. The black stone was not stone. It was obsidian, and it has just cut through flesh, bone, and muscle more easily than any steel blade you have ever seen. The Macuahuitl was the primary weapon of Aztec warriors, and its engineering was more sophisticated than any European of the time could imagine. The core of the weapon was a dense wooden club, typically oak, about 1 to 1¼ meters long. Along the edges of that club, obsidian blades were fitted and secured with resin and leather, creating a continuous cutting surface on both sides. Modern analysis under an electron microscope revealed something that defies logic. The edge of the obsidian is only 3 nanometers thick. For comparison, the sharpest steel surgical scalpel available today is about 300 nanometers. The Macuahuitl was roughly 100 times sharper than a modern surgical instrument, and it was developed by a civilization that never had access to metal. The Spanish chronicler Bernal Díaz del Castillo, who fought alongside Cortés and survived to tell the tale, wrote in 1568 something historians still quote in astonishment. He described seeing an Aztec warrior strike a horse's chest with this weapon and open the animal to its entrails with a single movement. Horses were animals the Aztecs had never seen before the Spaniards' arrival. They were unknown, frightening, almost mythical creatures to Mesoamerican peoples. And yet, instinctively, Aztec warriors discovered that the Macuahuitl could fell these animals with brutal efficiency. Spanish accounts also describe suits of steel armor that simply could not be repaired after an encounter with this weapon. The steel dented, the leather tore, the obsidian did not give way. What intrigues archaeologists and modern scientists goes beyond the weapon's effectiveness. It is the engineering behind it. Obsidian is a volcanic glass that is extremely brittle. Any wrong impact, any incorrect angle, and the blades shatter. Developing a combat-worthy weapon from this material required centuries of experimentation, trial and error, fine-tuning the spacing between blades, the fitting angle, the thickness of the wooden core, and the tension of the leather that held them. Every detail had to be optimized to maximize cutting and minimize breakage. Experimental archaeology research conducted in 2005 demonstrated that the Macuahuitl can penetrate flesh and muscle with an ease that surpasses medieval European weapons. A civilization without metal, without the wheel, without draft animals, created a weapon that outperformed European steel in the most fundamental measure: the ability to cut. No complete Macuahuitl has survived to the present day. The wooden core rotted away over the centuries, and the leather that bound the blades disintegrated with it. What remains are the obsidian blades at archaeological sites, and the detailed descriptions from the conquerors who fought against it, and had to admit, grudgingly, that that stone weapon terrified them more than anything they had encountered in Europe. The unanswered question is, how many other Aztec technologies vanished along with the civilization that created them? How much knowledge was lost when the conquerors burned the codices, destroyed the temples, and silenced the master craftsmen? The Macuahuitl is merely what survived in the victor's accounts. What if what was destroyed was even more impressive? Perhaps the answer to what humanity is capable of creating is not in the future. Perhaps it is in the past. And perhaps no example illustrates that better than a Greek mathematician who, more than 2,000 years ago, used only sunlight to destroy an entire fleet of warships. Archimedes' death ray. The year is 212 BC. You are a Roman naval commander approaching the walls of Syracuse with the most powerful fleet in the Mediterranean. Your ships are huge. Your soldiers are the best warriors in the known world, and your mission is simple: take the city. Syracuse has no army capable of facing Rome in the open field. It has no fleet sufficient to contest the sea. What it has is one man, an elderly mathematician who spends his days drawing circles in the sand and computing things no one else understands. His name is Archimedes. And as you position your ships for the final assault, something begins to happen. First one ship starts to smoke, then another. Then flames erupt on wooden hulls, though no flaming arrows have been shot, and no soldier has come near. Your ships are catching fire from a distance, and you cannot see where the attack is coming from. Historical accounts describe one of the most unnerving weapons ever conceived: polished bronze mirrors placed on the walls of Syracuse, angled with mathematical precision to concentrate the sun's rays on a single point on the wooden hulls of Roman ships. The historian Lucian, writing in the 2nd century AD, mentioned the use of incendiary mirrors in Syracuse's defense. The Byzantine historian Zonaras, in the 12th century, detailed that Archimedes used hexagonal mirrors to focus sunlight and destroy the enemy fleet. For centuries, the story was treated as legend, a poetic exaggeration by chroniclers seeking to magnify Archimedes' genius. After all, using sunlight as a weapon seemed impossible, until someone decided to test it. In 1973, Greek researcher Ioannis Sakas assembled 70 volunteers, each holding a flat, polished bronze mirror, and positioned them together, aiming at a wooden replica of a Roman ship about 50 meters away. In a matter of minutes, the wood caught fire. The experiment worked. In 2005, MIT students repeated the test with 127 mirrors aimed at a ship replica 30 meters away. The wood ignited in under 10 minutes. Later, the TV program Mythbusters attempted to reproduce the experiment under conditions closer to a real battle scenario, with moving ships and a changing sun angle. The first test failed, but on a second attempt in 2006, the wood caught fire again. The physics works. The question is not whether it was possible. The question is whether it was actually used. Physicists and military historians who dismiss the story of Archimedes' death ray raise practical, hard-to-ignore arguments. To work in real battle, dozens of mirrors would need to be kept aimed at a single moving point on a ship rocking on the waves, with the sun's angle constantly changing, and soldiers struggling through the chaos of a naval assault. The coordination required would be almost impossible without instantaneous communication. Moreover, accounts of the death ray appear only in sources written centuries after the event, while other of Archimedes' weapons, like the claw, a crane that grabbed enemy ships and capsized them, are described by sources much closer to the time. Perhaps the death ray is simply a legend built around a very real genius. But here's what makes this story impossible to dismiss entirely. Archimedes was not an ordinary thinker. He was the greatest mathematician and engineer of antiquity, the man who calculated pi to impressive accuracy, who discovered the principles of buoyancy, who designed catapults so advanced they kept Rome at bay outside Syracuse for 2 full years with a much smaller defending force. If any human in the ancient world had the mathematical knowledge to calculate the exact focal angle, the ideal distance, and the precise arrangement of mirrors to concentrate enough solar energy to ignite wood, that man was Archimedes. And perhaps the more honest question is not whether he built the death ray. Perhaps it is. Why do we assume he could not? What else were minds like his capable of creating in civilizations we never imagined so advanced? And speaking of advances that defy time, there is a weapon that has traversed 3,000 years of history, conquered entire continents, and never needed to change a single detail of its design to remain the deadliest thing on the battlefield. Composite bow. The year is 1241. You are a heavily armored European knight, defending the plains of Poland against the Mongol advance. Your armor weighs 30 kilograms. Your horse is the largest and strongest available. Your lance can pierce any known shield. By every standard of your time, you are invincible in the open field. Then you see the enemy. Mongol horsemen in light armor, mounted on smaller horses, carrying bows that look far too small to be a real threat. They don't close in. They stay 200, 300 meters away, galloping in circles and loosing arrows as they ride. You cannot reach them. You cannot even get close. And their arrows pierce your steel armor as if it weren't there. In minutes, your horse falls. Then, you too. That small, seemingly fragile bow that destroyed you had been perfected by peoples of the steppes for more than 4,000 years. And throughout all that time, no one ever needed to change its design. The composite bow is a work of materials engineering that anticipates, by millennia, concepts modern science would only formalize in the 20th century. Its construction uses 3 different materials, each chosen for a specific physical property. The central core is wood, which provides the basic structure and absorbs intermediate stresses. On the inner face of the bow, facing the archer, strips of animal horn, typically buffalo or ox horn, are glued on. Horn resists compression extraordinarily well. On the outer face, toward the target, layers of animal tendon fiber, carefully separated and dried, are glued on. Tendon withstands elastic tension better than nearly any other natural substance. When the bow is drawn, the horn is compressed and stores energy. The tendon stretches and stores more energy. The wood distributes the forces. At release, all of this is liberated simultaneously, producing power that simple wooden bows, even much larger ones, could never match. The numbers are hard to believe, even with the science explained. A typical Mongol composite bow had a draw weight above 70 kilograms and an effective range of more than 450 meters. For comparison, the famed English longbow, considered Europe's dominant long-range weapon, required a bow more than twice the size to reach similar distances while delivering inferior force. The composite bow fit beneath a mounted rider's arm. It could be fired forward, to the side, or even backward while in full gallop, with devastating accuracy. The earliest evidence of this technology was found in the Andronovo culture in Kazakhstan, dated to 2800 BC. That means that while the Egyptians were still building the pyramids, the steppe peoples had already fully mastered this bow. And the design they used in 2800 BC is essentially identical to the one the Mongols used in 1241 AD. 4,000 years, zero significant changes. That detail genuinely puzzles archaeologists. Technologies that work well tend to evolve modified, experimented with, improved over time. The composite bow did not. From Hungary to Japan, from the Russian steppes to the deserts of Persia, completely different cultures separated by thousands of kilometers and centuries produced composite bows with the same sequence of materials, the same characteristic recurved shape, the same rigid tips called siyas, the same curing and drying times. Construction required at minimum a full year. The wood needed months of drying. The tendon had to be prepared in thin layers and cured slowly. The horn had to be heated, shaped, and glued with animal-based adhesives of specific formulation. Any mistake at any stage would ruin the entire bow. Yet societies with no written contact consistently arrived at the same result. Some archaeologists propose that this improbable uniformity can only be explained by a network of specialized craftsmen who traveled among nomadic groups, carrying technical knowledge as a commodity more valuable than metal or spices. Others suggest the process's complexity left no room for experimentation. Any deviation meant failure, and failure meant death in battle, so only the exact tradition survived. Whatever the explanation, the composite bow represents something beyond an efficient weapon. It represents knowledge so perfectly calibrated, so completely optimized, that 4,000 years of human history, with all its wars, invasions, cultural exchanges, and technological revolutions, found nothing better to replace it. Until gunpowder arrived. And even then, in some regions, the composite bow continued in use for 2 more centuries after firearms emerged, because some solutions are so perfect that time simply cannot improve on them. 6 weapons, 6 impossibilities. The conventional explanation for each of these weapons always follows the same path: trade routes, parallel invention, available materials, trial and error. And for each weapon individually, that explanation works. But when you look at them all together, a different pattern emerges. Knowledge that appears already perfected persists for centuries with impossible consistency, and then disappears completely as if it never existed. History is not a straight line toward progress. It is a cycle of discoveries and losses, of knowledge won and then forgotten. And the weapons that survived in museums and archaeological records are only fragments of what humanity has once been capable of creating. Now I want to hear from you. Which of these 6 ancient forgotten weapons surprised you the most? Leave a comment telling me which ones you already knew before this video and which surprised you most. And tell me, what topic would you like to see in the next video? Your suggestions help shape this journey with me. If you made it this far and enjoyed the expedition, leave a like. It tells me it's worth continuing to dig deep into history. If you're not subscribed yet, subscribe now and turn on the notification bell, because the next adventures are coming and you won't want to miss them. But before you go, I need to tell you something. Most people look at history as if it were something smaller, outdated, primitive. You are not most people. You stayed until the end. That makes you a true explorer. And explorers like you are the reason this channel exists. I am Curious Chris, and I'll see you on the next adventure. Until next time.